My partner told me I wasn't cut out for the pressure of a management role and should just be happy where I was. I smiled and kept my secret. Now, he's sitting in a boardroom, anxiously waiting to meet the new regional manager, the one who will be his new boss, me. This is where the story truly begins, and you won't want to miss what happens. Make sure you're subscribed to see it through to the end. We're always curious. Where in the world are you all watching from today? Let us know in the comments. The words hung in the air of our meticulously clean, minimalist living room, as out of place as a splash of mud on a white canvas. Babe, are you sure you're cut out for that kind of pressure? Greg didn't look up from his laptop, where he was scrolling through what I assumed were sales reports. His voice was casual, laced with a familiar, feathery brand of concern that always felt more like a weighted blanket than a comforting hug. I had just finished telling him my news, my voice brimming with an excitement I couldn't contain. The regional manager position for the entire Western Territory was opening up. David Chen, the VP of Operations, had personally encouraged me to apply. It was the next logical step, the culmination of 7 years of late nights, successful projects, and exceeding every target set for me. For me, it was a mountain I had been training to climb my entire career. For Greg, it was apparently a cliff I was about to foolishly walk off. I stood by the kitchen island, my hand still wrapped around a glass of water, the condensation cold against my skin. "What do you mean by that?" I asked, my voice quieter than I intended. He finally looked up, his brow furrowed with that practiced look of gentle worry. "I just mean, it's a huge role, Allison. We're talking 80-hour weeks, constant travel, firing people. It's a pressure cooker. I've seen what it did to Henderson before he retired. It aged him a decade. I just want you to be happy. Maybe you should just be happy where you are." "Happy where I am?" I repeated, the words tasting like ash. I was a senior project lead. I managed the company's most complex logistics accounts, orchestrating multi-million-dollar transitions that required precision, diplomacy, and a spine of steel. I was good at my job. I thrived on the pressure. He knew this. "You're great at what you do now," he conceded, as if that proved his point. "There's no shame in staying there. It's a solid, stable position. You don't have to keep climbing just because the ladder is there." He delivered the words with the patient tone of a man explaining a complex theorem to a child. In his mind, he was being the protective partner, the voice of reason saving me from my own misguided ambition. But what I heard was different. I heard, "You're not strong enough. You're not smart enough. You're not enough." A familiar, cold knot tightened in my stomach. It was the same knot I felt when he'd suggested I let him punch up my presentation for the board last year, or when he'd advised me against negotiating my last salary increase because it might make me seem difficult. He called it protecting me. I was beginning to realize he was just keeping me small. I walked over to the sofa where he sat, leaned down, and kissed his cheek. His skin was warm, his focus already drifting back to the glowing screen. I forced a placid smile. "I appreciate your concern," I said, my voice betraying none of the seismic shift happening within me. He patted my hand absently. "Just thinking of you, babe." As I walked away towards our bedroom, the cool, quiet resolve settling over me was as clear and hard as diamond. He thought he was defining my limits. He had no idea he had just shown me his. The betrayal wasn't just in his doubt. It was in the crushing realization that the man I loved didn't see me at all. He saw a version of me he was comfortable with, and he would fight to keep me there. The silence that followed that conversation was a living entity in our home. It wasn't the comfortable quiet of two people in sync, but the strained, hollow space between two people pretending everything was fine. Greg seemed to believe the matter was settled. He had dispensed his sage advice, and I, with my gentle kiss and quiet thanks, had surely accepted it. He moved on, oblivious. I did not. A few nights later, we were having dinner with another couple, Mike and Sarah. Mike worked in a different division at our company, a fact that always made Greg puff up his chest a little, turning any conversation into a C-suite strategy session. "So, the big RM job is still open," Mike said, swirling the wine in his glass. I heard Henderson's last day is Friday. Any idea who's in the running? Greg leaned forward, a conspiratorial glint in his eye. My money's on Tom Abernathy from the Midwest Division. The guy's a shark. Closed that massive Apex Industries deal last quarter. He's exactly the kind of killer they need to SH. Ake things up. He took a bite of his steak, chewing with a self-satisfied air. He glanced at me, a quick, almost pitying flicker in his eyes. Allison was thinking about throwing her hat in the ring, he said to the table, his tone light and breezy, as if discussing a fleeting, amusing hobby I'd considered, like pottery or beekeeping. Sarah, ever my supporter, turned to me. Allison, you totally should. You'd be amazing at that. Before I could respond, Greg chuckled and patted my arm. We talked about it. It's a brutal gig, not really her style. She's more about the details, the execution. That top-level stuff is a different beast. He said it with a smile, framing it as a compliment. She's a brilliant specialist, not a general, but we all heard the subtext. He was drawing a line in the sand, politely and publicly putting me back in my box. I felt the heat rise in my cheeks, but I held his gaze and offered a serene smile. Tom Abernathy is a strong candidate, I said evenly, giving nothing away. It will be interesting to see who they choose. Later that night, as I lay in bed listening to the soft rhythm of Greg's breathing, the anger I had suppressed began to crystallize into pure, unadulterated focus. He saw me as his partner, the woman who organized their social calendar and picked up his dry cleaning. He saw me as the details person, someone skilled at executing the grand visions of killer men like Tom Abernathy. He had forgotten who I was from 9 to 5, and often from 5 to 9. He had forgotten that I was the senior project lead who had salvaged the disastrous Kestrel account after 2 other leads had failed. I was the one who had built our company's entire cross-country logistics framework for temperature-sensitive materials, a project so complex it had become the new industry standard. He saw my success as a series of completed tasks, not as evidence of my capability for leadership. A quiet thought echoed in the darkness, a mantra that would carry me through the coming weeks. He sees the girlfriend, not the strategist. He saw the woman who lived in his house, but he had forgotten I was the one who had built her own career, brick by painstaking brick, right under his nose. And he had no idea that I was about to build my masterpiece. Our relationship hadn't started this way. When I first met Greg at a company mixer 5 years ago, he was charming, ambitious, and refreshingly direct. He was a rising star in the sales department, and I was a mid-level project coordinator, hungry and determined. He was drawn to my drive, or so he said. I love a woman who knows what she wants, he used to tell me, his voice full of admiration. But over the years, as my career began to accelerate, his admiration slowly curdled into something else. It became concern. His support became protection. The shift was subtle, 1,000 tiny instances that I had brushed aside. There was the time he suggested I wear a softer color for a major client pitch because my navy blue suit was a little intimidating. There was the performance review where I was rated exceeds expectations, and he'd remarked, "Wow, you must have really impressed them," as if my competence were a delightful surprise. The most significant turning point had been 2 years ago, when David Chen first took me under his wing. David was the VP of Operations, a legend in the company who was sharp, fair, and had an uncanny eye for talent. He didn't see gender or politics, he saw results. After I successfully navigated a supply chain crisis during a national shipping strike, saving the company millions, David had called me into his office. Allison, he'd said, his office immaculate with glass walls overlooking the city. That was impressive work. You didn't just solve the problem, you anticipated the next 3 problems and solved them, too. That's not management. That's leadership. From that day on, David became my mentor. He gave me challenging assignments, included me in high-level strategy meetings, and critiqued my work with a blunt honesty that was more validating than 1,000 empty compliments. He was sculpting me for something bigger. When I told Greg about David's mentorship, his smile was thin. "That's great, babe," he'd said. "Just be careful. A guy like Chen doesn't do anything for free. Make sure you know what he expects in return." The insinuation was ugly and deeply insulting, suggesting my merit wasn't enough to earn a senior executive's respect. Now, with the regional manager position on the line, David was my staunchest advocate. A week after my disastrous conversation with Greg, I met with David in his office. "So," he began, leaning back in his chair, "are you going for it?" "Greg thinks I'm not cut out for it," I admitted, the words leaving a bitter taste. David scoffed, a rare display of open disdain. With all due respect to Greg's sales record, his assessment of executive temperament is irrelevant. He sees the org chart from the ground up. I see it from the top down. I know what the role requires, and I know what you are capable of. The question isn't what Greg thinks. It's what do you think? His confidence was a balm on the wound of Greg's doubt. "I think I can do it," I said, my voice firm. "I know I can." "Good," David nodded, his expression serious. "Because Tom Abernathy has already applied. So has Maria Flores from the Southern team. They're both strong. You'll have to be stronger. Your application needs to be flawless. Your strategic plan for the first 90 days needs to be bulletproof. This isn't just about wanting the job, Allison. It's about proving unequivocally that you are the only logical choice." I left his office with a fire in my belly. The conflict was no longer just a vague sense of being underestimated by my partner. It was a clear, defined battle on two fronts. At home, I had to maintain a facade of contentment for a man who believed my ambition was a flaw. And at work, I had to prepare for the biggest professional fight of my life. Greg saw a woman who needed to be sheltered. David Chen saw a leader waiting for her moment. I decided it was time to prove David right. The application process was a covert operation conducted in the stolen hours of the night. While Greg slept, I turned our quiet den into a war room. The official job posting was a generic list of corporate requirements, but I knew, thanks to David's guidance, that the real test was the unpublished one, the strategic proposal. The board didn't want a manager to maintain the status quo. They wanted a visionary to revolutionize the region. My investigation began not with people, but with data. For a week, I was a forensic accountant of logistics, diving deep into the Western Territory's performance metrics. I analyzed everything: shipping times, fuel costs, client retention rates, employee turnover, and interdepartmental workflows. Greg's department, sales, was a particular area of interest. They were great at closing deals, but their follow-through on coordinating with my department, project management, was sloppy. This created delays and friction, issues the client felt, but that management had thus far dismissed as growing pains. I spent hours building charts and models, uncovering inefficiencies that were costing the company millions a year. I found redundancies in shipping routes and archaic software that was slowing everyone down. While Greg was watching sports, convinced I was just catching up on emails, I was mapping out a complete overhaul of the regional infrastructure. The clever trap wasn't a single document or a secret recording. It was the sheer, overwhelming weight of my competence. It was a 40-page strategic plan, complete with financial projections, risk assessments, and a phased implementation timeline. It was meticulously researched, brutally efficient, and undeniable. The interview process consisted of 3 rounds. The first was with HR, a standard screening I passed easily. The second was a panel interview with 4 department heads. I knew one of them, Robert from Finance, considered me too young for the role. I came prepared. When he questioned my experience with budget cuts, I didn't just talk theory. I walked him through my proposed operational restructuring, pointing to line items on a pre-prepared handout that demonstrated a 15% cost savings without a single layoff. I watched his skepticism melt into grudging respect. All the while, Greg remained blissfully ignorant. His condescension had morphed into a kind of benign neglect. He'd see the light on in the den and pop his head in. "Still at it, babe? Don't work too hard. Remember what we talked about." He would say it with a smile, a casual reminder of the limits he had set for me. "Just tying up loose ends on the Kestrel account," I'd reply, minimizing a document that outlined the future of his entire region. One evening, he came home buzzing. "Just got off the phone with Tom Abernathy," he announced, pulling a beer from the fridge. "He had his second interview today, says he thinks it went really well. He's the guy, Allison, I'm telling you. It'll be good to finally have a real gunslinger in that chair." I just smiled. "That's interesting," I said, stirring the risotto on the stove. I had also had my second interview that day, and I had a third one scheduled for the following week, a final meeting with David Chen and the CEO. Tom Abernathy was a gunslinger, it was true, but I was a grandmaster of chess, and I was about to put him and Greg in checkmate. The final interview was less of an interview and more of a coronation, though I didn't know it at the time. It was held in the main boardroom on the top floor, a cavernous space with a panoramic view of the city skyline. On one side of the massive mahogany table sat David Chen and our CEO, Mr. Davies, a formidable man with a reputation for being tough but fair. On the other side, there was just me. I wasn't nervous. The late nights fueled by coffee and conviction had forged my plan into armor. For an hour, I walked them through my 40-page proposal. I didn't just present data, I told a story. It was a story of untapped potential, of frustrated employees, of wasted resources, and, ultimately, of a clear path to becoming the most profitable and efficient region in the entire company. When I spoke about the disconnect between the sales and project management departments, I was careful. I used neutral corporate language, communication friction, workflow bottlenecks, misaligned project kickoff protocols, but the message was clear. The current structure was broken. Mr. Davies listened intently, his fingers steepled, his eyes never leaving mine. David was more expressive, nodding at key points, a small, encouraging smile playing on his lips. When I finished, there was a long pause. Mr. Davies leaned forward. "Ms. Miller," he said, his voice resonant, "this isn't a proposal, it's a blueprint. You've diagnosed the illness and prescribed the cure. One question: how do you plan to handle the pushback from team leads who are comfortable with the old way of doing things?" It was the final test. He wanted to know if I had the backbone to match the brain. "With respect, transparency, and an unwavering focus on the data," I replied without hesitation. "Change is always met with resistance. My job isn't to be liked by everyone, it's to make this region successful. We will set new expectations, provide the necessary training, and measure performance against clear, objective metrics. Those who align with the vision will be essential to our success. Those who don't will have the opportunity to find a role that better suits their comfort level." David Chen's smile widened. Mr. Davies leaned back and looked at David. "Well, David," the CEO said, "it seems your judgment was, as usual, impeccable." 2 hours later, my phone rang. It was David. "Allison," he said, and I could hear the smile in his voice. "Mr. Davies was wondering if you were available to start on the 1st of next month." A wave of pure, unadulterated joy washed over me, so potent it made me dizzy. I gripped the steering wheel of my car, having pulled over to take the call. "Yes," I breathed. "Yes, I am." "Congratulations, Allison. You earned this. We'll handle the official announcement next week. Welcome aboard, Regional Manager." I ended the call and let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. I had done it. I had actually done it. My private victory felt immense, a secret sun glowing inside my chest. That evening, Greg came home looking deflated. He tossed his keys on the counter with a clatter. "Well, it's official. Abernathy didn't get it." "Oh?" I asked, feigning mild surprise as I plated our dinner. "Yeah, he just called me, said he got the rejection email this afternoon. He can't believe it. No one can. Now the rumor is they're hiring an outsider, some corporate hack from head office. Great, just what we need." He slumped onto a stool, the picture of professional despair. "This company is going down the tubes. They pass over a proven winner like Tom for some unknown suit." He shook his head, looking at me with a weary sigh. "See? This is the kind of corporate nonsense you're better off avoiding. It's all politics. It would have just chewed you up and spit you out. I placed a plate of chicken parmesan in front of him. In that moment, he had never seemed smaller. He was so wrapped up in his own narrative, so certain of the world as he saw it, that he couldn't see the truth even as it served him dinner. His words were meant to be a comfort, and I told you so, wrapped in a blanket of concern. But they were just echoes in a world he no longer understood. The irony was so thick, it was almost suffocating. He was mourning the loss of a killer leader, completely oblivious to the fact that his new boss was about to ask him to pass the salt. The week between accepting the job and the official announcement was one of the most surreal of my life. I was living a double existence. By day, I was secretly meeting with David and HR, signing my new contract, and reviewing the organizational charts of the departments I would soon command. I was Allison Miller, incoming regional manager, a name on a confidential document that held the power to reshape the professional lives of over 200 people. By night, I was just Allison, Greg's partner, the woman who listened patiently to his complaints about the company's mysterious and obviously flawed hiring decision. The stakes had never been higher. The secret was a fragile, precious thing, and keeping it intact required a level of self-control I hadn't known I possessed. My case was no longer about winning the job, it was about establishing my authority from the very first moment. David Chen was my co-conspirator in this. The announcement needs to be handled delicately, he'd said during one of our planning sessions. If we just send out a memo, it will get lost in the rumor mill. You'll spend your first month fighting for respect. We can't have that. So what do you suggest? I asked. A show of force, he said with a glint in his eye. A mandatory, all-hands meeting for every department lead in the region. We'll call it a synergy and strategic alignment meeting. They'll all come in expecting some boring presentation from corporate. We'll keep the identity of the new RM a secret until the very last moment. You won't be introduced as Allison Miller, their colleague. You will be introduced as their new boss. The power dynamic will be established instantly and publicly. It was a brilliant, theatrical, and slightly terrifying plan. It was also perfect. The email went out on a Wednesday, sent from David Chen's office. It was a masterpiece of corporate jargon, announcing the mandatory meeting for Friday morning to welcome new leadership and synergize departmental objectives for the upcoming fiscal year. Greg's reaction was exactly what we'd predicted. "Oh, for crying out loud," he grumbled, reading it on his phone over breakfast. "A synergy meeting? Can you believe this nonsense? I have a dozen client calls to make on Friday. Now I have to waste my morning sitting in the boardroom, trying to look impressed by whatever empty suit they've hired to run the show." He looked at me, shaking his head. "You're so lucky you don't have to deal with this top-level garbage." "It does sound a little dry," I agreed, sipping my coffee, my heart hammering against my ribs. The morning of the meeting, the tension was palpable. Greg was particularly grumpy as he put on his best suit. "Have to go kiss the ring," he muttered, struggling with his tie. "Probably some guy who got the job because his father-in-law plays golf with Davies. That's how it works at this level, Al. It's not about merit." I helped him with his tie, my fingers steady as I straightened the knot. My own suit was already chosen, a sharp, dark charcoal ensemble that was professional, powerful, and utterly devoid of softness. It was hanging in the guest room closet, waiting for me. I was driving to work separately, under the guise of an early off-site client visit. "You'll be fine," I said, patting his chest. "Just be charming." "Charming is my middle name," he said with a weak smirk. "Wish me luck." "Good luck, Greg," I said, and I meant it. "I have a feeling today is going to be very memorable." He left, completely unaware of the irony hanging in the air. I took a deep breath, the silence of the apartment buzzing around me. My double life was about to merge into a single, explosive reality. I had built my case, the stage was set, and the audience was waiting. The boardroom was filled with the low murmur of nervous energy. I watched from the small observation room adjacent to it, a one-way mirror that David's assistant had discreetly shown me to. It was a vantage point of pure power. I could see them all, but they couldn't see me. There were 12 of them, the department leads of the Western region, seated around the long mahogany table. I saw Robert from finance, looking stern. I saw Maria Flores, my former competitor for the job, looking poised and professional. And I saw Greg. He was leaning back in his chair, trying to project an air of casual indifference. He was whispering something to the man next to him, the lead from it, and they both shared a cynical smirk. He looked bored, annoyed, and completely out of his depth, though he would have been the last to admit it. He was a sales guy in a room that was about to be run by a strategist, and the rules of the game were changing without his knowledge. At precisely 10:00 a.m., David Chen walked in. A hush fell over the room. "Good morning, everyone," David began, his voice calm and commanding as he took his place at the head of the table. "Thank you for being here. I know a mandatory meeting on a Friday is not your ideal way to end the week, but this is important. As you know, with Mr. Henderson's retirement, this region is entering a new chapter." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. The board and I took the selection process for the new regional manager very seriously. We spoke to a number of highly qualified candidates, both internal and external. We weren't looking for a caretaker. We were looking for a visionary. We were looking for someone with the strategic insight to identify our weaknesses and the operational courage to fix them. I saw Greg shift in his seat, his feigned nonchalance fading into genuine curiosity. David had their complete attention. "We found that leader," David continued. "This individual has a deep, institutional knowledge of our company, a proven track record of executing complex projects under extreme pressure, and a strategic plan for this region that was, frankly, the most impressive I have ever seen." He scanned the faces in the room, his gaze lingering for a fraction of a second on Greg. "It is my great pleasure to introduce you to your new regional manager." David gestured toward the door I was standing behind. "Please welcome Allison Miller." I pushed the door open and stepped into the room. Time seemed to slow down. I registered a series of snapshots, the polite, confused applause starting and then faltering as people recognized me. Maria Flores's eyes widening in genuine surprise, quickly followed by a small, respectful nod. Robert from finance's jaw tightening almost imperceptibly. But my focus was on Greg. His face was a canvas of cascading emotions. First, blank confusion, as if his brain was struggling to process the sight of me walking to the head of the table. Then, a flicker of disbelief, his eyes darting from me to David Chen and back again, searching for the punchline of a joke. And finally, as I took my place beside David and looked out at the room, at my team, the dawning, sickening realization. The blood drained from his face, leaving him pale and slack-jawed. His smirk was gone, replaced by a look of pure, unadulterated horror. I gave a small, composed smile to the room. "Good morning," I said, my voice steady and clear, amplified by the room's acoustics. "I'm Allison Miller. For those of you I haven't had the pleasure of working with directly, I was most recently a senior project lead in the logistics division." I didn't look at Greg. I didn't need to. I could feel his gaze on me, a physical weight. "I am incredibly excited to take on this role," I continued, my eyes sweeping across the faces of my new reports. "I see immense potential in this region, and I have some very clear ideas about how we can unlock it. My 90-day plan, which each of you will receive a copy of this afternoon, focuses on 3 core pillars: efficiency, integration, and growth. We are going to break down the silos between departments. We are going to innovate. And we are going to become the top-performing region in this company." My authority wasn't loud or aggressive. It was quiet, it was factual, and it was absolute. The public humiliation Greg suffered wasn't from me yelling at him or exposing him. It was achieved by my mere presence, by the calm, irrefutable fact of my competence. He had told me to be happy where I was, and right now, standing at the head of that table, I had never been happier. The rest of the meeting was a blur of professional efficiency. I laid out the broad strokes of my vision, answered a few sharp questions from Robert, and established the schedule for my one-on-one meetings with each department lead, which would begin the following Monday. Throughout it all, Greg remained unnervingly still, a statue carved from shock. He didn't speak. He didn't move. He just stared at the polished surface of the table in front of him. When David officially concluded the meeting, the room broke into a flurry of activity. Several of the leads, including a gracious Maria Flores, came up to congratulate me. They were sizing me up, of course, but their handshakes were firm and their words were respectful. My authority had been cemented. Greg was the last to move. He waited until the room had nearly cleared before he slowly pushed his chair back and stood up, his movements stiff and robotic. He approached me as I was gathering my notes, his face still ashen. "Allison," he croaked, his voice barely a whisper, Can we talk?" "My first one-on-one is scheduled with the sales department," I said, my tone cool and professional. "That would be you. We can talk on Monday at 9 a.m. in my office." The distinction was clear. He wanted to talk to Allison, his girlfriend. He was going to have to talk to Ms. Miller, his boss. The look of panic in his eyes deepened. The ride home in our separate cars was a prelude to the inevitable. I walked into our apartment to find him standing in the middle of the living room, the same room where he had so casually dismissed my ambitions just a few weeks prior. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked, his voice cracking. "All this time, the late nights, I thought, why would you let me go on like that?" "Like what, Greg?" I asked calmly, setting my briefcase down. "Like an idiot, making all those comments, praising Tom Abernathy, telling you not to apply. I look like a complete fool, Allison." "Yes," I agreed, "you do." The simple, unvarnished truth of it seemed to stun him into silence. He had expected me to soothe his ego, to say it was all a misunderstanding. He started to backtrack, his hands gesturing wildly. "Look, I am so proud of you. You have to know that. I was just worried. I was trying to protect you from the stress from all the corporate politics. I never, ever thought you weren't capable. I was just being a concerned partner." There it was, the excuse I knew was coming, the lie he had told himself. For so long that he almost believed it. "No, you weren't," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. "Let's be honest with each other for once. You weren't concerned, Greg. You were comfortable. You were comfortable with me being one step behind you. You were comfortable with me being the supportive girlfriend who was good at her detail-oriented job. The moment I expressed a desire to step out of that role, to be your equal or, heaven forbid, your superior, you tried to put me back in my place." Tears welled in his eyes. "That's not true. I love you. I've always supported your career." "No," I said, shaking my head with a final, heartbreaking clarity. "You supported my job. You never supported my ambition. You don't respect me, Greg. Not really. You don't see me as an equal. And after today, I don't think you ever will. You'll only see me as the woman who humiliated you." I walked to our bedroom and pulled a suitcase from the top of the closet. His face fell. "What are you doing?" "The regional manager can't be in a relationship with a subordinate who doesn't respect her," I said, opening drawers and pulling out my clothes. "But more importantly, Allison can't. I spent years making myself smaller to make you feel bigger. I'm done with that." He begged, he pleaded, he promised to change. But the words were hollow, desperate attempts to glue back together something that had been shattered long ago. His dismissal of my dream wasn't a single mistake. It was the final symptom of a disease that had been poisoning our relationship for years. 2 weeks later, I sat in my new office, the corner one with the glass walls and the city view. My one-on-one with Greg had been brutally professional and mercifully brief. He had since requested a transfer to another region, which I had promptly approved. The door opened, and my new assistant popped her head in. "Ms. Miller, the department leads are ready for the weekly strategy review in the boardroom." "Thank you, Jessica," I said, gathering my files. "I'm on my way." I walked down the hall, the sound of my heels clicking confidently on the polished floor. I felt a sense of peace, of rightness that I hadn't felt in years. I hadn't just won a promotion. I had won myself back. I had chosen my own potential over someone else's comfort. And as I stepped into the boardroom, ready to lead my team, I knew with every fiber of my being that I was exactly where I was supposed to be.